everybody, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Amelia Hamilton, and I am the head of community here at NextGen Planners. And in today's show, I am joined by the fantastic Laura Blake. Welcome, Laura. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure completely. So to start off with then, what we like to do in the podcast is just to kick things off with, what does a day in the life look like for you? So before anybody knows exactly what it is you do and where you do it, could you just give us all a broad overview of what a day in the life of Laura Blake looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, often really, really varied, but I think the common thing I might be doing is usually meeting with one of our donors, or maybe a financial planner. And I think sort of in the background, I'm then often working on bespoke proposals for someone who is interested in working with me or the charity that I work for. And then often working on kind of opportunities for our supporters to get to know the projects that they fund through my organisation. So I might be organising visits to charities, I might be putting together case studies of charities we've funded, or I might be working on impact reports for donors. So it's, yeah, every day is a bit different.
Amazing. So let's dive into it then. Who you work for? So you are Director of Philanthropy at Somerset Community Foundation. So for anybody who doesn't know what a community foundation is, or your specific one, Somerset Community Foundation, could you talk to us about community foundations generally and what the mission is?
Yeah, so our mission at Somerset Community Foundation is to help passionate people in Somerset change the world on their doorstep by funding local causes and inspiring local giving and philanthropy. And I'd say our mission is probably quite similar to the other. There are 47 of us in total community foundations across the UK. I think one of our challenges is that we have fairly low public awareness that we're out here. So I think it might surprise listeners to hear that community foundations provided £170 million of funding and 40,000 grants last year alone. And so we do, there's a few things that we do as organisations. For donors, we provide expert philanthropic advice to help them give to the places and causes they care about, and to sort of make giving very simple, rewarding and impactful. And then I think what's really interesting about community foundations and really important is that we are very responsive to the needs of today in our communities, but we very importantly, we have a very long-term vision, and we really have a focus on building endowments for the benefit of our community, today and forever. So here in Somerset last year we supported over 500 local organisations, and across the network, obviously much wider than that. So for local, very small local charities, we're a vital source of charitable funding to keep them going, to kind of help pilot great ideas, to scale them, and to keep important charitable projects going year on year.
Amazing. And yeah, like you said, there doesn't seem to be, they're not, community foundations aren't as well known as perhaps they should be, considering the work they're doing in the communities. Why do you think that is? And perhaps could you give me a brief history of community foundations? How long have they been around? Are they a brand new thing, or how did it start?
Yeah, so I think the reasons, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but I think, our challenge is that we're individually often fairly small organizations. We don't tend to have quite a, large marketing budget behind us or whatever. So I think that holds us back in a way. And I think, I don't know, there's something about the name, it doesn't quite click immediately what's a community foundation. So, we often do have to explain a little bit more about what we do. But I think that's something, I would love to see us doing more of nationally, is kind of really promoting community foundations as a brilliant place to give locally, which of course lots of people do want to do. And in terms of the model, it's not a new model. The original community foundations were actually in the US and were started quite a long time ago, but the model came over into the UK in the 1970s, and the first UK community foundation was then the Swindon Community Foundation. It's now Wiltshire Community Foundation. And then, of course, it's just really grown a lot since then. And, we've been going since 2002. There are some younger foundations in the network, but so every community foundation is quite unique in terms of how long it's been going, how big their endowment is, and the impact they make in their community. But yeah, so it's not a new model. We've got lots of experience under our belt, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic work. And so you mentioned about how many projects and how many things the foundation is involved with in the local community. Could you perhaps give some examples of that? Are there some specific examples about the role that you play in the community kind of practically?
Yeah, I mean, I think for community groups, for small charities, social enterprises, we are, a really key local funder for those smaller grassroots groups that often they often actually just don't have the time to go out and do fundraising. The average group that we fund in Somerset, their turnover is £36,000 a year, and they're primarily kind of run by volunteers. So these are really tiny organisations, and so for them, we're a sort of really reliable source of funding they can come back to again and again if they need to, but also that we can help them to grow and develop over time as organisations. So I think community foundations, our role as important local funders can't be underestimated, and particularly also actually in rural communities where there is not as much philanthropy, there's not as much kind of corporate giving as you would see in the larger urban areas and urban communities. So again, we become more important in that way. But I think we also play a really important kind of influencing role. Often part of our role is kind of capturing a lot of data, doing a lot of research and that community insight to help local people, local authorities, the public sector, and just generally, the wider public understand, well, what are the problems, what are the needs in our communities. And we see that a lot in Somerset, where people think it's a very idyllic rural county, but they don't see we have a lot of challenges around poverty, around homelessness, around rural isolation, mental health. There's lots of issues going on. So part of our role is to really put a spotlight on that and give a voice to those local communities too.
Yeah, and so what would a typical donor look like then? So people who are wanting to get involved or who are currently involved, what kind of profile do they have?
Yeah, I mean, so lots of people give through community foundations. We get donations of all shapes and sizes, but I would say those that have, a more significant relationship with us, so perhaps they have their own charitable fund that we manage on their behalf. There's probably sort of a couple of the types of people that we see. I think the thread that runs throughout everyone is that they love Somerset. They love the place where they live and they want to give back to the county. So we often see a lot of family business owners. They've done very well. They really want to give back to the community where they're from or where their business has been operating, and that might be personally or it might be through their business. And I think actually at the other end of the spectrum, something I found really interesting is we'll often see people make quite significant gifts who have otherwise lived fairly modestly. We see lots of kind of single older people who perhaps don't have children. They've built wealth almost kind of accidentally. They've sort of invested very well, they've had good advice, they've lived quite frugally, and they want it to do something good. They don't have anyone to pass it on to, and they want it to go back in to the community, and we're that sort of very safe long-term place for it to go. So it's a real mixture, but those are the sort of the people we see often.
Yeah, and so obviously we're NextGen planners, and our focus is mainly financial planners. And you and I have talked about this a bit, about how the intersection between a community foundation and financial planning and financial advice fits in. But from your point of view, how do you think that collaboration could work? Why do you think it's an important thing to perhaps bring up to clients? Or perhaps just start with, what do you think a partnership could look like, the collaboration could look like between a community foundation and financial planning?
Yeah, I mean, I guess quite uniquely, I think lots of solicitors, for example, might have partnerships with charities. I think that side of things is quite common. I think community foundations have quite a unique role or a unique offer for financial planners and other professional advisors in a way many other charities don't. And I think the difference with us is that the way I see, or that we see partnerships working, and is that they are very complementary. We see ourselves as a very complementary kind of bolt-on service to what financial planners and other professional advisors can offer their clients. We know from reports that have come out with, in and around the financial planning community, that, I mean, we see it as, obviously it's very commonplace in the US, but it's increasing here, where clients are more and more asking their professional advisors for philanthropic advice or kind of signposting. And so for us, what we have found, certainly with the partnerships we have with financial planners, is that they see us as a really complementary service. So where they have a client, for example, they've built up significant wealth, they're looking after their family, grandchildren, or whatever it might be. They've got all the sort of family cared for and looked after, and then they still have surplus wealth. They've done cash flow modeling. Everything looks really, really secure, and they've got spare. They have given to charity in the past, but now they can see they could do that in a more significant way. Often if that client is interested in giving locally, their financial planner most likely can't really give them expert advice in that area. Not all financial planners or advisors can build up that sort of extensive knowledge of philanthropy, and there's a lot to know. So for us, what we found is those planners see us as the place they can send a client, or we can have a meeting together to get that sort of impartial, free advice about often just where to start. I think the great thing about community foundations is we all operate with integrity at our heart, and that if someone comes to us and they want to support, we think they could achieve their philanthropic goals by directly supporting a local charity, we'll direct you in that way. If we think the best thing for you is to think about setting up a fund with us, then great, we'll encourage you to do that, but we'll give you the advice to sort of make a really balanced decision. So for me, it's I've seen it firsthand with the planners that I work with, is that they just feel relief that they can get their clients sort of the same quality of kind of trustworthy expertise and experience that they want to offer them in terms of the rest of their planning.
Absolutely. And if people are interested in perhaps using that service, or were maybe hesitant to what kind of scope of charitable organizations you are involved with, could you give some idea of the areas that, if somebody was interested in something that's more environmental, or if someone was interested in something that was to do with younger people, or whatever it is, are there options that people can choose to put their money in something that they individually feel passionate about in that local area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, one of the strengths of community foundations is the breadth of the organizations we support. And again, every community foundation is different, but that is a feature that is common to all of us. So people often quite like that. They can say, look, I'm happy to support the whole county, but I want to support youth, or I want to put go towards environmental projects or mental health or older people, whatever it might be. So that's one of the things I love about the job, is that we have such diversity of the projects that we fund, that people can give to lots of different things, in whichever way they want to. And I think I would probably mention that often the way that people will give through a community foundation is to have a charitable fund with us, which acts just like a charitable trust, except we take on all of the administrative burden and will help create that sort of giving strategy with a donor, and then carry out the grant making on their behalf and report back to them. And I think that in going through that process, we really build a strong understanding of people's passions, their interests, which causes have touched them personally in their lives, and then help them come up with, a plan based on that, and also where the need is in our communities. So, it's really, every relationship is very bespoke, and you can really give to the things that matter most to you.
For sure. And I guess the great thing about that is that really echoes the approach to, good financial planning as well, the relationship with the client, understanding what's important to them, and making sure that you're really listening and being able to help them achieve something. And that's an ideal service if you can find that as a financial planner, to then pass that on for your client, to be able to send them to a place which you feel echoes a lot of what your approach in providing advice and providing that kind of service. So it seems like it's a more natural partnership than perhaps one might expect to begin with.
I think so, and I think relationships really are at the heart of every community foundation. We can only give out the funds that we do by building really solid, trusting relationships with those that have funds with us. And one of the things that community foundations do also is we manage funds that we hold in investments for the long term. And again, for people to trust us with that, we've got to be really, really rigorous in our governance and our approach to that. Trust is at the heart of everything that we do, and it's intensely personal, and we all care very, very deeply about the donors that give through the community foundations, because often it's very, very personal. We have people that give in memory of loved ones who are no longer with us. We've got people who, the next generation are managing that fund on behalf of someone who has passed away, and it's always at the heart of everything we do to make sure we carry out those wishes in the absolute spirit with which they're intended.
Yeah, definitely. And so you clearly have these conversations often with people about what the things that matter to them, and how they want to kind of navigate this situation. I wondered, would you have any advice to planners perhaps who are wanting to approach a conversation about philanthropy? Do you have any tips that you think you could share in that kind of area?
Yeah, I think my number one thing is to always and just encourage to have the conversation. A simpler question is kind of, have you thought about charitable giving? I think, I've had quite a lot of these conversations with planners where they're sort of thinking about how they might approach it and how they could bring philanthropy more into their day-to-day client conversations. And often I think it's the advisor just feeling confident to say, what, actually, you've got everything here that you could want. You've given to charity in the past. Would you want to do something more significant with your philanthropy? I think the conversation can often end up waiting until you're talking about legacy. And obviously leaving a legacy is an amazing thing to do. Legacies are often the largest gift that people can give in their lifetime. But it's also wonderful to be able to get the joy out of giving in your lifetime. So I think just that simple tweak of bringing philanthropy into the conversation, when you can see that, perhaps there has been some interest in giving before, and you think that there's capacity there, often the barriers to people getting involved in philanthropy are kind of practical ones rather than the lack of desire or motivation. It's often kind of not knowing where to start, wondering if the amount they can have can make a difference. I had a planner recently tell me they were planning to leave, I think, something like 7 million to charity, but didn't think it was a very big amount, which, that's huge and transformational for many charities. But it's things like that, and actually just having that conversation to put it on the radar, and also having the connections with organizations like community foundations, or having a bit more knowledge of the philanthropy space, just having the confidence to start it is half the battle. And then I think just having some kind of key questions up your sleeve. So, what is the difference you want to make? What are the issues that you're most passionate about? Do you want to give locally, or actually is it more about national issues that you're passionate about, or international work? Just being able to kind of get an initial sense of that, so that you could signpost people to the right way. I think is great.
Yeah, and I suppose on a scale that's more kind of regional and local to you, there's an inevitability that it's more tangible, and you are there to kind of witness the impact. What kind of significance do you think that has to play?
Huge, huge. It plays a huge part for sure. Again, lots of the conversations I have with people when they come to us or are introduced to us, you know, many people will say, I give to bigger charities and I like what they do and it's very important, but I don't feel I can see where it's going. And that's understandable if you're giving to a £100 million turnover organisation. People really love the tangibility of giving through community foundations. We can take them to see the projects. We'll report back to them on, where every penny's gone. It's just very different. And that when you're talking about an organisation that has a turnover of 20,000 and you've given them 5,000 for 3 years, like that for them is so powerful. So, I think it's just, it can be quite overwhelming when you look at some of the big issues that are happening around the world or the challenges that need to be solved, but being able to start on a very local level to say, here's where I can really make a difference, 5 miles away, a mile down the road in my county, people just light up when you can talk to them about that.
Yeah, and in the kind of times we're living at the moment, I wondered if you could perhaps talk about what you think the role of a community more generally is, and what benefit feeling part of a community and invested in what's around you, what part that plays, just more generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last few years and the challenges we've all faced together have shown us in great detail the importance of community. Community foundations were at the forefront of the COVID response in terms of community support. We mobilised extremely quickly. For us, we were giving out our first COVID grants. We launched an appeal and we're giving out our first grants within 5 days of the first lockdown. And just our organisation raised 1.5 million. Of course, the network was much, much bigger than that. But we saw then all of these grassroots groups popping up, just people who came together to say, right, we have to look after the older people in our village. We need to look after people with disabilities. We need to change the way that we run charitable services to get online. There was enormous community cohesion. There was enormous goodwill. And I think that showed then and there just how vital it is to have these small local organizations where people can feel connected, and come together and get the support that they need on their doorstep from people who they know and who look like them. So, I think we've seen it there. We've seen it through the cost of living crisis. These are really, really challenging times. People do need to feel connected to one another when they can feel otherwise really alone, going through some really, really tough stuff.
Yeah, and you mentioned some, stories there that demonstrate the real power of the community and of community foundations. Are there any specific kind of success stories or initiative that you think really do demonstrate, that power of community and philanthropy that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID was a brilliant example of that, as I've talked about, and it brought together kind of people, we had lots of donations from all different angles, whether public sector, from charitable trusts, individual donors, philanthropists, everybody, local business. And it really did mobilize the community around one issue. I think it's not necessarily like the core thing that community foundations are known for, but I think one initiative that I think I personally feel is quite a special one is one that, strangely enough, it did start with us here in Somerset, and it has rolled out to become a national programme with lots of community foundations running it in some form. And that's our Surviving Winter Appeal. And I like it because it was very much driven by an idea from someone within the community. So someone that was a donor to us in a fairly modest way kind of came to us and said, look, I don't need my winter fuel payment. And I want to get it to someone who does need it. Can you help me? And we sort of thought, okay, look, there's an idea here. There's something here. We knew obviously that So, winter fuel payments are a universal benefit. They go to everybody, regardless of whether you need it or not. And so we knew lots of people would probably want to follow suit. So we thought we'd try it. And, 10, 12 years on now, we've raised well over £1 million here in Somerset. And that money, all of that money is recycled. It goes back out to give winter fuel grants to people living in fuel poverty. And we do lots of other innovative things around trying to support energy efficiency improvements for people living in cold, kind of drafty homes. We also provide, this year it's helping to provide warm spaces, which was an initiative started last year, very much on a grassroots level, to provide community spaces for people in fuel poverty or people just struggling to pay their bills. So, that has, across the network, again, you'll be into the tens of millions of pounds raised for that, all from that kind of one very simple idea, and us being that kind of mechanism or umbrella organisation that could coordinate that work.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense. It's almost anger-inducing that it's not more widespread or more common, and that you go, well, that's such a simple idea. It doesn't take that much work or time, or it's not somebody sacrificing a lot. It's just going, sure, I can afford that, let me kind of start to give back. And it's those kind of simple things that make such a difference, isn't it? And like you said before, it doesn't have to be someone giving millions. It can be as part of a plan that you're funding these projects in a way that is really beneficial to everybody, and you can really see the impact of what you're doing right in front of your eyes in your local community.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't have to be giving, I think that's another misconception is, people think to start working with a community foundation, you've got to be giving millions of pounds. Absolutely not the case. We've got lots of different ways you can give, from even just giving a few £100, £1,000. You don't have to be super wealthy at all. So, and all of us have those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah. And so looking forward then towards the future, what are the goals? What are your aims? How do you see these community foundations evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I think things that I'm personally very excited about is continuing to build our partnerships with professional advisors. And I think that is a priority for every single community foundation across the UK. And I think, we're really lucky. We're starting to see much more engagement with financial planners. I think, we've got a very strong partnership with Old Mill, who are a local firm, and, building strong partnerships with some of the other larger local firms. I think for us, we know that's where there's just such huge potential to build a culture of local philanthropy in the UK, and really just, I think, take away those barriers in terms of not knowing where to start or not having a philanthropic advice that's accessible and local. And I think the scale of that could be huge. I think, I think Old Mill certainly see that opportunity where just by having those conversations, they could have an enormous social impact alongside the work they do with their clients. So that for me is really exciting. And I think also one of the other opportunities that's there for us is, obviously there's a huge intergenerational transfer of wealth coming in the next sort of 10, 20 years. And I think that presents lots of different opportunities. I think we are seeing, which has been surprising for me, lots of next generation philanthropists coming through, which in Somerset I honestly wasn't expecting to see. I've had, in the last couple of years, I've had 3 new funds opened by people in their 30s, and not insignificant sums of money, but it's because of that generational transfer of wealth taking place, taking on family businesses and things like that. So that's been super interesting. And then I think it also presents a really significant opportunity for charitable legacies, where again, community foundations are so well placed for leaving a legacy, because you can leave something that's very much permanent and it will benefit communities for, forever. So again, I think there's a huge opportunity to encourage more people to leave a gift in their will too.
Yeah. And so if you are a financial planner who's listening to this podcast, how would you suggest, what are the first steps? How would you get involved in this? How can they look to have these conversations with clients, and how can they refer them to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think my one piece of advice would be, certainly my main piece of advice would just be go and have a look and make a connection with your local community foundation. In most places, it's the county you live in, but there are then community foundations for Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, as well. So it's have a look, make the connection, go and reach out to the CEO or the development or philanthropy director. I guarantee they will be absolutely delighted to hear from you. It's one of the parts of our job that can be tough, is kind of doing that sort of cold approaches to planners to really try and help them understand why they should talk to us and that we're not just like another charity. So do make that connection. They will love to hear from you. They'll tell you more about the work they're doing. You can get a sense of their credibility and kind of build that partnership with them. And that would be, I think, step one. And I think there's also a great book that's been published recently, which I think is just useful for anybody kind of who might have conversations about philanthropy. And that's by Emma Beeston and Beth Breeze, and it's called Advising Philanthropists, Principles and Practice. And it's really just gives you that sort of, I think, just gives you a boost, gives you that bit more of a sense of confidence and having those kinds of conversations and understanding what's out there and, what good philanthropy can look like. Because, there's many ways to give and give well.
Yeah, definitely. And so when they are kind of trying to look at why a community foundation, why is that best suited for them, in kind of a snapshot, what's the sound bite that you would give as to why that would work for them?
Oh, it's hard to give it in a soundbite, but I'll do my best. I think the way I always describe it is that we make philanthropy simple, rewarding, and impactful. I think the context to that is that often people will think a charitable trust is the vehicle for charitable giving on any kind of significant level. And I think what people don't realise is just the level of work that goes into the creation and management of a charitable trust, and then also the kind of the time and energy pull on the donors in sort of managing that and kind of doing all of the due diligence, finding the charities to give to. Are they spending the money well? Chasing that up, building relationships with them if you need to. Like, there's an awful lot of work that goes into that, which I think can be quite off-putting. And often when I've sat down with clients referred to us, we've done that comparison between the two and said, look, this is what happens with a charitable trust. This is the service that we can offer you. And they sort of go, oh, thank goodness we found you first. For those that, particularly for those that want to give locally, I think it often just takes that burden away and it gives them back the gift of time. And time is often the most precious asset people have. Of course, money too, but they don't want to spend all of their retirement or all of their spare time managing philanthropy because there's a lot to do.
Definitely. And as the old idiom, is the word idiom, time is money. And, if you can free up some of the time, maybe you can put even more money into places that desperately need it right now. Which is all fantastic. And it feels such a brilliant partnership that we should really be celebrating more. And it's not a requirement, it's not an obligation. As you said, it's just about bringing up those conversations with the client, and if they're interested, great. If they're not, you haven't lost anything there. It's not pushing for it, but just being aware that the organizations like yourself exist in a way to make life easier and to help, in a way that perhaps a planner or an individual just can't.
Absolutely. And we know from feedback from Old Mill, who've referred clients to us most recently, they just felt, well, like, this is brilliant. It just adds to what we can offer. It gives us a more holistic relationship with our clients. We can meet all of the needs that they have, not just the ones that are, more conventional planning issues.
Definitely, for sure. It sounds fantastic. But to kind of switch gears a little bit, we have a couple of questions that we always like to round off our podcast with and to ask our guests. And the first one is, I know you did already mention a book. I don't know whether this is the book you also want to talk about here or whether you have another one. But we do always like to ask our guests for a book that has helped them in their career. So what book have you chosen?
Well, so I had to really think hard because I've got a 2-year-old, and so my time for reading is very minimal, shall we say. But I did a few years ago, I really did greatly enjoy Simon Sinek's book Start With Why. And I think, as somebody, so I've always worked in the charity sector for my whole career for the last sort of 15 years or so. So I've always been extremely values driven and kind of, motivated by making a difference in a very social way. So this book, I think, really spoke to me, because also a big part of my job is really getting back to the why. The why do people want to give? What is it that's either an experience that they've had, perhaps their own upbringing, or perhaps a health issue that they've had or a loved one has had, or whatever it is, but really getting to know and understand what's motivating them to want to give, what's behind that, is really enables me to build the relationships that I do. And then I think also in my day job, it's such a useful thing to come back to. I've had the privilege in our organization of doing a lot of work on our mission, values, and more recently a rebrand, which we're working on at the moment. And I think, again, it's just every time that process brings you back to the why. Well, why are we doing this work? What's the difference it's going to make? And I think it's just an amazing way to kind of recalibrate yourself and check in with that regularly, to make sure you're not kind of drifting away from that and you're bringing it back to the mission as much as you possibly can. We like to do that as much as we can as a team too. Get out and see the projects we fund as much as we can, hear about the difference they're making, and that, I think, that recharges us all a lot.
Yeah, it's so easy to get distracted, isn't it? I mean, especially if you've got a 2-year-old, I can't even begin to imagine the distractions that brings at the moment. But yeah, if you can kind of center yourself, okay, why am I doing this? What is the purpose? What do I care about? That feels like, a reflection that would be helpful to anybody. So yeah, great recommendation. That sounds like an excellent book. But to finish with them, perhaps this is a slightly unfair question for you because you're not in the world of finance per se. But the question we like to round things off with is, what are you most excited to see in the world of finance in the next 10 years?
Yes, I mean, I'm sure I won't give as kind of illustrious or smart an answer as many planners would, but I think for me, I think there's a couple of things. I'm really excited to see how investing changes as that next generation come through. I'm interested to see things like impact investing growing, and kind of obviously there's a lot more focus on kind of ESG in terms of funds and things. So I'm interested to see the impacts that has on some of the big issues in the world, particularly on environmental issues, and see will that help to shift the dial. And I think I'm also, biased when I say I'm really excited to see kind of planning and advice changing and embracing more of what we can offer. So, philanthropy hopefully coming more into the mainstream in the financial world, and it being just a normal part of the conversation in 10 years' time, as opposed to kind of a bit of a fringe thing that only some people feel comfortable talking about. So that might be wishful thinking on my part, but, being here today hopefully will help.
Definitely. Hopefully we can just keep this growing and as we said before, you don't lose anything from having these conversations. It's not like you're forcing anybody to do anything, but if you can just push the dial slightly, make that difference, include it in the conversation, then hopefully we can get to that place that you're talking about, which sounds pretty good. I hope that we can that will be the future in 10 years time. So for now, then, I would just say thank you so much for talking with me, Laura. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the NextGen Planners podcast.
Thank you so much. It's just been such a joy to know that we can spread the word about community foundations to your amazing audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Laura on the NextGen Planners podcast. If you did enjoy this podcast, then please do share it on all social media platforms. You can listen to past and future episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on our website, which is nextgenplanners.co.uk. On that website, that is where you can find loads more information about our brilliant community. Finally, if you can, do leave us a review. It helps to grow the podcast so we can get it out to even more people. Thank you very much.